Good evening. I'd like to call to order this July 14th, 2014 meeting of the Forest Hills Board of Education. Mr. Tepfer.
Mrs. Bissinger.
Here.
Dr. Heiss.
Here.
Mr. Helmelgarn.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Fruman.
Here, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The exits, there's two here, there's one all the way in the back of the room, and then one over here on my right, your left. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Tepfer?
Mrs. Bissinger.
Yes.
Dr. Heiss.
Yes.
Mr. Helmelgarn.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Fruman. Mr. Fruman.
I'm here too, yes. Welcome everybody to yet another special meeting for the discussion of facilities. As many of you know, the board made facilities a priority this year. We began our discussions actually in January at one of the board meetings, and the board has been acting as its own facilities committee in these discussions. We've had these meetings in public, and this is actually our 15th meeting. We've had 14 prior meetings over the last 6.5 months. At our last meeting on June 23rd, the board passed resolutions of necessity and asked our treasurer, Rick Tepfer, to go to Hamilton County Auditor and provide us some information which we'll review tonight. So for tonight, the agenda is that we'll hear from Mr. Tepfer on the information that was brought back from the Hamilton County Auditor. Dr. Jackson will talk to us briefly on the plans that are under consideration. The board will have some discussion. We will, of course, have, as always, the opportunity for public commentary. And then the board may make a decision on how it wants to proceed. As all of you know, if you've been here before, this is not a public meeting, but a meeting held in public, so we will have the opportunity for public commentary. I have one green card up here now. If you want to address the board, please do so. Get a green card, and just make sure those cards are up here so that we can address you at the appropriate point in the meeting. With that, Mr. Tepfer, could you share with us the information that's been returned from the auditor?
Jim, I think we have one business item.
Oh, I'm sorry,
4.1,
right.
if we could
Thank
do
you,
that.
the Human Resources Report. Thank you very much. Ms. Carnahan?
Item 4.1, appointments. It's recommended that the following personnel be appointed for the 14-15 school year. Erica Daggett, Communications Coordinator for the district.
Thank you.
So moved with pleasure.
Second.
Mr. Tepfer?
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Bissinger.
Yes.
Dr. Heiss.
Yes.
Mr. Helmelgarn.
Yes.
Mr. Fruman.
Yes, thank you.
I had the opportunity to interview her, and I'm very pleased.
Her resume is certainly very impressive. All right, now that we've followed up on the item I missed, Mr. Tepfer?
Yeah, from the last meeting, as you outlined, Jim, the 4 pieces of information we asked from the Hamilton County Auditor were millage amounts for various bond issue projects, as well as dollar amounts for a half-mil PI for a couple of them. The 4 were $98 million, $98 million plus a half-mil permanent improvement levy, $103 million, and $103 million with a half-mil PI. The at your place is the 4 pieces of information with the issue at the bottom of the first page showing you what each of the amounts are formally. The summary of the 4 issues, $98 million equates to approximately 4.23 mils, or $148.05 per $100,000 of market value. The second one is $98 million and a half mil PI. That equates to 4.73 mils, or $165.55 per $100,000 of market value home. That half mil PI generates approximately $624,305 per year ongoing. The third one, $103 million, is 4.45 mils, or $155.75 per $100,000 of market value home. And the fourth piece of data from the auditor's office is $103 million with a half mil permanent improvement. That equates to 4.95 mils, or $173.25 per $100,000 of market value home. Up till now, these are the four pieces of data the board could consider if there's a desire to move forward. One of these four would need to turn into a resolution to proceed, which the board would need to act probably no later than next Monday evening. The following Monday evening is the deadline to have an issue put on the November ballot. That's the data to consider.
All right, so what we really need to do is, if we're going to do it, we need to instruct you tonight what resolution to proceed to prepare and have available for us to consider at Monday's regular
Correct.
board meeting.
That is correct.
Any questions of Rick about this process, anybody? No?
So we could have more than one for next week? Or do you?
You can, but we would only be, obviously,
You don't vote for one.
vote for one. That's correct.
Dr. Jackson, could you talk to us a little bit about the differences between the 98 and the 103?
I certainly can.
We know about the 0.5 PI, I think, and unless anybody wants to discuss that a little bit here now, or later, too.
Yeah, do a little bit later, I think.
Well, basically, the two proposals that Rick and I took to the county auditor were the $98 million and the $103 million difference. Of course, the difference in dollar figures is $5 million. The $98 million was to very closely compared to what the Ohio School Facilities Commission shared as the needs of our facilities. And that primarily is the interior needs of the buildings, as well as, but in this as well, there were some exterior concerns as well. But the two issues that were not addressed, because they had not been addressed in OFCC or by us in regards to this point, was the transportation relocation. Basically, it would be my suggestion that if we were going to look at any additional funding, that we would look at, number one, moving our transportation facility from the Anderson property for a number of reasons. The biggest one that comes to my mind, of course, is safety. Yes, we have had the transportation there for several years, and we've been very fortunate, although we have had some minor little incidents. Remember that our buses and our student and parent traffic are all moving in and out of the same entrances, and same entrance and same exit, as well as our fueling station is right there on that grounds as well as our maintenance. The estimated dollar figure to move that transportation facility, including the fueling, including maintenance, is approximately $2.2 to $2.4 million to take that off of that property and relocate that in another location. The second piece of information has come to light. We've discussed it a little bit in the past, and that is the possibility of some additional learning spaces across our district, not just at the elementaries. But it really came to light with the survey when John Fox had asked the question about all-day kindergarten, and that came back fairly positive. That would be a great direction that our district would want to maybe begin to consider. I'm a total proponent, I think everybody knows, of all-day kindergarten. I understand the cost associated with that at moving forward. But I think that the additional dollars in that, which would be roughly $2.8 million, $2.6 to $2.8 million, could conceivably allow us to look at somewhere around 8,000 to 10,000 additional square feet of flexible learning spaces for teaching and learning, which would then give us an opportunity to look at moving towards an all-day kindergarten program, even if we were to start possibly with just kind of a transition program, an extended day program or something like that for, even if it were just 15-18% of our students. So primarily, that would be the additional dollars that the board, I'd like them to consider between the 98 and the $103 million. Any questions?
One question.
Sure, Julie.
Thank you. The $98 million, I think you said, Dallas, it was close to what the OSC needs for facilities were. Is it about 80%? Is that the figure that I heard?
Yes, it's approximately that. That's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions for Dallas?
Is there, and part of that number for our non-educational facilities, like the natatorium and the gymnasium, that space, is that included in the 98?
Included in the 98 and the 103, of course, $1 million, which would be some additional spaces in regards to science improvements across, especially at the high school level. Also, some flexible learning spaces at each of our elementaries already in that number. The additional 8,000 to 10,000 square feet, depending on how we would utilize that, could conceivably be 8 or more classrooms across the district as well, whether they're at the elementary level or some of them might be at the high school levels as well.
Is there any savings potential by moving the transportation facility, like, for example, collaborating with a government entity or another school district, or is that not to that point to be able to consider?
We have, no, actually, we have been considering that, Mr. Smith. We've had some very good conversations with our township in regards to could there conceivably some partnership there. And I think that we could go, look at that and explore that a little bit further. Potential savings for the district, other than the fact that, again, having a newer facility or a new facility with, the equipment and such could be a savings there as far as man hours goes. If we were to do something with, let's say, the township, there could be some potential savings with maybe purchasing of bulk fuel. Be probably more of a savings for the township than us, but the more quantities you buy, there is a possibility of some additional savings.
Question on Lake Kindergarten. Right now, are we under a waiver to not have to do it, or is that expired and it's not on the table right now?
It's not on the table right now. Actually, it was in law that we would all move towards all-day kindergarten, and then for 2 years, the state asked if districts were not doing that to provide a waiver, which we have done, and now it's off the table. The state realizes that the cost to districts to implement that, for instance with us, finding additional classroom space as well as the operational dollars for that.
But I was also concurrent with the 2 years they cut our budget, and so I'm just wondering, it's probably not a question of if, it's probably a question of when.
I believe that, all roads kind of point to that through the state and across the nation in regards to intervening earlier with students, not just at kindergarten, but even at the preschool level. Lots of grant funding for especially some of your needier districts across the country and the preschool avenue as well.
So basically, to ignore what we see are signals of something coming and just not build for this, well, I'm sure we'll have some discussion on that. But.
Well, I think that's right, and what I found compelling was the presentation from John Fox, where when given the opportunity to comment at the community that participated in the survey, thought it had value, had a lot of interest in it, and to be able to accommodate it to some extent, or at least provide the learning space, as Dr. Jackson described it, for the potential to do it makes some sense at this point.
I couldn't imagine going ahead with a project, finding out 2 years later or 3 years later that the state is going to mandate it, and having to go back to our community and say, oops, we didn't plan ahead. But, okay.
Right, it's a whole lot cheaper to do something now than it would be then.
This would give us a good leg up in regards to beginning to implement that, even if it were on a transition to that all-day program.
Either that or keep the trailers. I don't know that we've really discussed it to a great extent, but the plan, or at least the resolutions, the information that's come back from the auditor is with and without the half-mil PI. I really think we owe it to our community, if we're going to move forward with this plan, that we make sure we have the funds available and committed to continue to maintain the property in the kind of condition it hopefully will be in when we finish the work. So I'm certainly in favor of, whether it's the 98 or the 103, also doing the half-mil PI, so we can, for the first time, have the funds available to maintain our facilities and not doing out of an operating budget.
Which is what we've had to do in the past, and Ray can attest that even our budget this year for our general maintenance and upkeep of our facilities has been that number and above.
Now, let's be clear, though, we self-funded until, Ray, how many years ago, when that essentially evaporated?
2008.
Okay.
Other discussion on 98 versus 103, or with or without the half-mil permanent improvement?
I mean, I'll say I'm a big fan of 103 plus the permanent improvement. I think if we're going to do it, it's our shot, and it's time to take it. We've waited around too long, and I'm talking about over years and years, and haven't addressed an issue that needs to be addressed. And I believe, from my research and all of our meetings and all of the people we've talked to, that this plan will put us out, 30 years with our buildings not looking like they have Band-Aids. I've been to plenty of the renovate to new type buildings, and I think they do a great job. And no, it's not the shiny brand new big building that's going to be out there, but I think we can do great for Forest Hills and great for our people. And if we can do it all at once, I think that much better, if it's something that we don't have to do again for another 30 years.
Well, I'll put some of this in context, and I spent some time today organizing some thoughts, because I think it's really important for the community to understand where we're coming from, or at least where I'm coming from when I decide how I'm going to vote on this. I feel like we have an absolutely urgent need to address the district facility needs. This last school year, we had, and some of you know this, and some people don't know it, we had raw sewage in the halls at both Anderson and Turpin High Schools. There are mice at Anderson. There's bugs in both Anderson and Turpin High Schools. The high school science labs in both buildings are an embarrassment. There's no air conditioning at Anderson, Maddox, or Summit. And those of you that have been in the buildings know that temperatures can approach 100 degrees in the early part of the school years and the late in the school years as we get into the late spring. We've got children in trailers at Maddox and Wilson. In fact, they've been there, and I've asked people. They've been there as long as I can remember. Some have said at Wilson as much as 20 years. Is that right? And the worst, at Wilson, those trailers are considered the desirable learning environments, even though the kids have to go outside to go into the building to go to the bathroom. Wilson is literally crumbling. We've got handicap access issues in all of the buildings. At Summit Elementary, there are places in the building that kids, parents, visitors can't even get to if they're in the wheelchair. There's simply no access. There are no security vestibules at any of the buildings. Notwithstanding some of the horrible things that have gone on throughout the country, we have no security vestibules in any of our buildings. And none of these conditions are new. The school board has been aware of these issues for 18 years. While the facilities have been a regular topic of discussion for one reason or another, and I'm not blaming prior school boards, there's important issues that everybody has to address. But for one reason or another, year after year, nothing's been done. With the exception of the last year when we had the failed $47 million bond. There's been nothing that's even presented to the community to vote on. Facility decisions have been postponed either because of a one high school debate or because of timing considerations such as the proximity to an operating levy or for any other number of reasons. Whatever the reasons, it's been continued year after year after year with nothing being done about the facility issues. And these facility issues create a huge financial strain on the district. We've never had a permanent improvement fund, never, in this district. The district has paid for all the maintenance of our facilities from the operating budget. And it's become increasingly difficult to do over the years because of the deferred needs and the inability to take care of some of the repair work that's been necessary. In the meantime, the buildings continue to deteriorate. The conditions of our facilities would be an embarrassment in any community. And I feel it's particularly embarrassment to a community like Forest Hills, one where we value education, one where we consider ourselves to be a high-performing district, notwithstanding the condition of our facilities, and notwithstanding that we have a relatively affluent district. The deteriorating facilities are impacting the education of our children. If you think that we're performing well, notwithstanding the facilities, I would say if we had the facilities, imagine how much better our kids could be doing. The facilities are harming property values, whether you've got kids in the district or not. Our children deserve better. And of course, every plan to address our facility needs and will cost money. The board looked at facility plans, this board, starting in January, looked at facility plans that ranged from $98 million to $209 million. We looked at plans with a wide variety of building configurations. Plans included consideration of consolidation at the high school level, consideration of consolidation at the elementary school level. We considered a plan with 2 middle schools. We considered any number of permutations of all of those. We considered renovation. We considered new. Of course, these financial constraints are both practical and legal. For instance, we are precluded by law from borrowing more than 9% of the assessed property of the value in the district. For us, that's $107 million. That's the cap that we can borrow. We can go over that cap if I've got this right, the values of the property in the district increased by more than 1.5% per year over the last 5 years. And with the economy the way it's been the last 5 years, we don't meet that criteria. So we cannot exceed the $107 million cap. We're also permitted to exceed the $107 million cap if we proceed with a facilities plan approved by the Ohio Facilities Construction Committee. We looked at a plan that met the OFCC guidelines. The cost of that plan was $173 million, and it would have included consolidation of the 6 elementary schools to 4 new elementary schools. We also considered a hybrid type plan that had an estimated cost of $134 million. The real problem with that plan is it simply wasn't viable. We would have had to tell the OFCC that we were doing a $173 million plan when we had no intention whatsoever of doing a $173 million plan. What's more, it wouldn't have allowed us to complete all of the necessary work at both the high schools and the middle school. We would have completed the 4 new elementaries and had insufficient funds to finish all of the other work that has been proposed to us by our consultant. At the end, what we did is we asked a marketing consultant, John Fox, to test community response to 2 plans. To the $98 million plan that would have continued the same building configuration with a renovation to new of the 6 buildings, well, 8, with a new Wilson, and the $173 million plan, which would have been 4 new elementaries and renovations of the two high schools and middle schools to OFCC standards. John Fox did that work for us. If those of you that were at the meeting saw his credentials, he knows what he's doing. He's a professional. He conducted a scientific survey of our voting community to gauge their support for the two plans under consideration by the board. Mr. Fox presented his preliminary survey results to the board on June 9th and his final survey results to the board on June 19th. Really, his presentation was excellent, and for those of you that saw it, you know what I'm telling you is true, and for those of you that didn't see it, I think it's still online, and I would recommend you go back and watch it. It's very informative. Mr. Fox explained that his survey results had a total sample error of plus or minus 4.4%. In other words, it has a 95% confidence level. And based upon the results of the survey, and don't take my word for it, please go online and read it, 59% of our voting community supports the lower cost plan, 27% strongly. Only 40% of the voting community supports the higher cost plan, 16% strongly. And when given the opportunity to compare the two plans, as they were asked to do in the survey, only 17% favor the higher cost plan. Based upon the survey results, Mr. Fox told me, and I'm quoting, "There is cautious optimism in the results of this research, with the community clearly preferring the lower cost plan with 6 elementary schools over the higher cost plan with 4 elementary schools." He told us, and I pushed him, that the higher cost plan does not have the support necessary for success. I asked him specifically, is there a way that the 40% support that we're seeing in your survey results could be tested, could be pushed, could be moved such that it could go above 50%? And he responded that even the 59% support for the lower cost plan is only cautiously optimistic. The 40% plan, in his opinion, was a no-go. So we were left with a choice. Actually, we're still left with the choice. This board is left with a choice. Either proceeding with the lower cost plan that has 59% of our voting community supporting it, at best cautiously optimistic, or doing nothing at all, because the 40% simply can't pass right now. In my opinion, doing nothing is not an option. In the last school board election, 3 of our present school board members were elected at that time. There were 4 candidates. Each and every candidate in that election said facilities was the most important issue facing this district. I agree. In the January board meeting, we all agreed we had to do something about the facilities. We all agreed that nothing was not an option. We pledged to this community to get something done with these facilities. We've worked for the last 6.5 months tirelessly on these facility issues. And it wasn't just the board members. In fact, it was far from just the board members. Dr. Jackson, Rick Tepfer, Ray Johnson, Dr. Jackson's facility committee, Joe Kunkel, and lots of others, and if I didn't name you, I apologize, have put countless hours into these facility issues. We've done our due diligence. We've had, as I said, 14 public meetings with opportunity to comment, where we've discussed these issues. We completed the due diligence. We addressed the issues to our community through the John Fox survey. Today, 59%, as I've said, of our voting community is in favor of the lower cost plan, where we renovate the 2 high schools, the middle school, and 5 of the 6 elementaries and build a new Wilson. If we do not move forward now, because of the operating levy cycle, it will likely be another 5 years or more before we can meaningfully address our facility needs. I say 5 years or more. I really believe 5 years is the minimum. In the meantime, buildings will continue to deteriorate. The cost of fixing our problems will rise. Now is the time to act. The plan we've developed is a good one. For those of you that saw Joe Kunkel's presentation, you've got a feel for what's there, more to come. It's an exhaustive renovation, and I'll use the term renovation to new, of all of the buildings based upon the needs of each building. Roughly, we'll spend $25.5 million at Anderson, $22.6 million at Turpin, $4.8 million each at Aaron Sherwood, similarly designed buildings, $6.2 million at Maddox, $5.7 million at Summit, $7 million at Mercer, and build a new Wilson, and there is even some additional work to do at Nagel. All the buildings will get some work. The renovations are meaningful. As Tony just said, it's not a Band-Aid. If you were here and you listened to Joe Kunkel, he explained that, and I spent time individually with Joe Kunkel and went through his entire scope of work and how he came to his numbers. I've got a strong comfort level that we're getting something important, something exciting, and something that I'm excited to support. So, looking at my fellow school board members, I will be supporting a facilities plan tonight. I was supporting the $103 million with the half-mil permanent improvement, and I would ask each of you to join me. Thank you.
I'm glad I said something before Jim.
Go ahead.
To me, the permanent improvement part, the best part about it is, once we complete this project, we're not going to have to make any big improvements for a period of time. So even having the permanent improvement levy there and being able to take care of little things, but also will help us get ready for when we have to start doing some more major things. So I think it's definitely much needed and won't impact our operational expenses.
Other discussion, other comments from our board? I certainly want to give our community opportunity to speak.
No, I agree with Tony. I mean, as far as the permanent improvement goes, we've been a victim of our own success for years. We've never had a permanent improvement fund per se, but for years we had a block of money set aside that was earning $1 million per year, approximately, in interest, that we didn't have to ask for any money. In our community, that's one of the difficult things we're dealing with now, is something we've never had to ask for before, we now have to ask for. Every other community, just about, has a permanent improvement fund where they get money, regular tax money. We had the foresight in the 25 years ago to put aside it's basically a rainy day fund, which we just use the interest to keep our buildings up, and we've been able to do that for years. Well, now, as we all know, instead of making $1 million a year, we're making $37 a year on that same principle. So it's not, and it's been like that since 2008. I mean, our numbers have gone down from the $1 million a year to literally thousands of dollars. So now we're at a point, well, now we're like every other district in the state that actually has a permanent improvement fund that they don't have to pull it out of operating funds. So to have that, now I see it, as Tony said, initially we may not need that much. Well, we have a history of not wasting things. So if the first year the $600,000 is not used, well, I see it as being put as part of the permanent improvement fund that we have now, and if interest rates ever go up, well, then so much the better for us. It also allows to take that money right now that we're spending out of the operating funds and use it toward the classroom, which impacts our operating levy cycle. Every chance I get, I bring that up because it's hard for anyone to understand, even people that are in, that the way our schools are funded, unconstitutional as it has been proven multiple times, that's the way it is in Ohio. And that's why every 3 to 4 years, we have to go out for an operating levy just for cost of living increases. And that's That's the way it is for every district in the state. Well, what this would do is, if you take a portion of that, and now what we're using on facilities, and take that out, well, now that funds can be used for what we do, for the in-classroom education. As far as how we got here, I believe that was a great summary. I am very confident that there's never been 15 public meetings in one session for facilities. It just hasn't happened. There's been one or two. We've had forums. And the other thing is, it's not just this time. I see us as building, previous boards have never got to this point, but we're building on we're standing on their shoulders. Okay, we're building off the work of previous facilities committees. I thought you put my time up there for a second. But we built on the backs of previous committees, and that's how we've gotten here. So we've never started from scratch. We've started and built on all the information, and that's how we are where we are now. I'm in support of the $103 million plan. It's still going to be an uphill fight. Not as much of a fight as $173 million, but we had a fight with the $47 million. So I don't know that the number is the end-all, be-all, but what are we getting for that? And for the work that we've done, I think, I too have looked at the Renovate to New, both in educational circles and business circles and in homes, where a full renovation is just that. It's a new learning environment. And I'm confident that this will propel us out for 30 years plus, for another generation, where we actually have something that people look forward. People come to our district now because of the education that our teachers and administration, but our teachers give. Our education is phenomenal. They come here in general in spite of the buildings. If we can now bring a facility space up to the standards that we have of what's going on in those facilities, there's no downside. We have it all. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Randy, Julie?
Go ahead, ladies first.
Really, I think I should go last.
Okay. Well, I've been looking at this and involved, and as Jim said, ever since Nagel was built. And we're at a crossroad point in the history of our school district. This is the 5th or 6th, depending on how you measure it, time we've tackled facilities. And at the beginning of this year, the board said we're going to take a more active role, leadership role, because there was some criticism that we were reactive in the past. Last year, we put a bond issue out to the voters, and they turned it down. We learned from that experience. Don't borrow long-term money to do short-term fixes. The plan we're considering doesn't do that. We need to provide substantial improvements in the learning environment, not just Band-Aids. Doing one building at a time is probably not going to get enthusiastic community support. They don't have the confidence to believe that we'll get around to them. I personally authored a long-term plan that had one at a time, but I recognize now, based on the feedback that we got, that that just will not enjoy support in our community. Somebody whose opinion I trust suggested that we go back to our objectives as we look at what our plan is. And when I looked at our strategic objectives, one was increased student achievement. The plan that we're considering will have more space for collaboration, special needs, which is something I think gets left out of the equation frequently, flexible learning space, technology infrastructure, and a more appealing appearance. And as I understand it, student achievement will be better served by those elements. Second thing is improved district operational efficiencies. Well, the plan that we're looking at really doesn't deliver any significant operational efficiencies other than, some energy savings, which will probably be negated by the increased cost of AC in the 4 buildings that don't have it now. But For the proposed or projected $1 million a year savings, we've also got to remember that we would be buying into a plan that was roughly $173, $175 million. And so the payout, it would take 75 years to get to a payout. Most business people would look at that and say that's not a good investment. Obviously, it's way more complex than that, but just from a top-level view, the payout is probably not there if you're going to look at it just from an efficiency standpoint. Develop a facilities master plan that addresses current and future needs. The plans we're considering making make the major improvements, except for Nagel, with all the space and improvements we talked about doing. Now, nobody knows what education is going to look like 5 or 10 years down the road, or 20. I suspect it's going to change a lot. So right now, all we can do is build in as much flexibility as possible. Goal 4, expand school community partnerships. Well, actually, there's not much here. I think the possibility of the transportation, and there's still a lot of opportunity to partner on health or athletic facilities, but we're not there yet. Establish Forest Hills as a district of choice in southwestern Ohio. If our buildings actually all look new or virtually new and have the space and infrastructure for 21st century learning, I think the facilities will no longer be a barrier to being the district of choice. We've talked about it. Our best assets are our teachers, our parents, quite frankly, our students, and that's what being a district of choice is all about. As Mr. Fruman mentioned, forward movement on facilities has been, I call it, held hostage by the one high school question, which finally has been resolved. Not because we actually made a decision, but because we know state law won't let us borrow the amount of money it'll take to build the one high school that would accommodate all the students from combining Turpin and Anderson, which, by the way, would then become the 8th largest high school out of 715 in the state of Ohio. Anyway, what is a 21st century learning environment? What are facilities that support that kind of learning? With one or two exceptions, nobody's been able to answer that question. I've had a lot of conversations with people. Learning is a dynamic process. Facilities are very tangible. What I've heard is needed is collaboration, flexible space, special needs space, technology, environmental improvements, that means AC, natural light, that type of thing. And the other aspect is aesthetics. Does it look good on the inside and the outside? Will somebody driving by want to buy real estate in our community? I've heard from some realtors who said that's not necessarily happening right now, some negative personal experience about drive-bys. One of my biggest questions is, and we've had this discussion at a number of our meetings, what does renovate to new mean? I've visited over a dozen renovated to new buildings in Cincinnati, Dayton, Kettering, and Claremont County. Almost all of them look new to me. Now, I didn't get into all these, so I had to look at some of them through windows, but the ones I did get into, they basically looked new to me. Can you imagine me peering into the, but anyway. Another big question is there really enough money to renovate to new? One of the questions I've been asked by some of the people in this room is $4.8 million enough to renovate air to new? I, just like you, well, actually Julie and I sat down with Joe for more than 2 hours, I think, and went over the line item budget. And do I have confidence that that's absolutely accurate? I don't have the expertise to say that. I have confidence in what Joe shared with us. I have confidence he's got the experience and actually done it in other places. But that's something I would like to see is some, what you call it, a second opinion or some other source to be able to be absolutely confident that, you know, our projections at the line item level are good enough to do what we think we're going to get. Over the last 6 weeks, I've had face-to-face meetings and phone conversations with dozens of people in our community, including Anderson Township trustees, Newtown Council, teachers, parents who don't have children in our schools, business leaders, union representatives, administrators, political leaders, and anti-tax leaders. Everyone that I spoke with realizes that we need to be doing something about facilities in our school district. I grouped these people into 3 camps. Don't borrow any money, spend from your operating budget. or borrow the least amount of money to maintain the buildings, or your current plan is not enough. Current plan, thinking of the $100 million. Even though we had the discussion that there's a legal limit on what the district can borrow. The discussions were helpful, and I'll get to my conclusion here in a second. Another thing, actually, Jim brought up data. To me, doing nothing is unacceptable. Doing nothing would sentence our students to our current facilities for at least a year, and possibly, depending on how you look at the levy cycle, 3, 4, 5 years. Same stuff, same problems that you mentioned with both Anderson and Turpin. As most of you know, I work for Procter & Gamble. P&G wouldn't make any decisions without getting data that tell us what a consumer wants or how she'll react to a product, essentially how they'll vote with their dollars. It's been explained that we actually have authoritative data. So to me, going out with a $175 million plan is the same as doing nothing, because we know darn good and well that it has very low likelihood of passing. We've got reliable data that says our best chance of passing a bond issue is the $100 million, whatever, 98, 103, in a $100 million range. Another key factor is that we're borrowing the max. And as I explained to some of the people that I've talked to, the law, we're doing the max that we can do. So if we're not doing enough, aside from going the OFCC route where we're borrowing a lot more money, but we're also having to comply with the government regulations and the way they require buildings to be done. Another key distinction, because I think people got confused about this, if we're not following the OFCC regs, that doesn't mean we're not building to code. We've still got ADA. All the buildings are still going to be up to code. That's the OFCC requirements are some additional requirements. Actually, we've had the discussion about that, but it just adds more to the cost. The $98 million plan will increase property taxes by about $148 a year for a $100,000 house. This means that an average $252,000 house, it'll increase by $373 a year. The survey says that's acceptable to our voters. The $175 million plan would cost $265, and Rick, I may not have these exactly right, but these are roughly correct. $265 per 100,000. That means for that $250,000 house, income, the taxes are going to go up by approximately $666,000 a year. That's not too, what I say, excuse me, 666, thank you, correction, keep me honest. $666 per year. And that's over and above what we're already paying for property taxes. And I also put that in terms of the median household income in Anderson Township of about $80,000. So that is a significant increase in taxes. Another comment that I got from talking to people were consolidation. We need to be consolidating to save expenses. But as has been brought up, we don't have the space to consolidate. Even though the demographic projections have consistently incorrectly predicted a much faster decrease in our enrollment than reality, Forest Hill School District is still not built out. If we built to the projections from 10 years ago, we'd be even worse shape than we are now. Depending on which enrollment demographic you look at, we would have built to an enrollment of somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 students right now. We have 7,500, so to buy that hook, line, and sinker, to me, is not a prudent or responsible thing to do. Organizational design. The four-year high school design seems to work. Our middle school, using the middle school concept, works. I haven't seen, I don't think this board has been presented with any ideas that are proven that other designs deliver better outcome for students than the design that we have now. And what I'm talking about is K through 6, middle school, and high school. We bought into a fad design back in the 70s without proof, and it was called Open Classroom. We were spending money to correct some of that, especially, like, for example, in the high schools very shortly after that. I'm not interested in buying into some fad design unless it is absolutely proven to not be equal to, but it has to be better than. Closing 2 elementary schools. Personally, I wanted to see us go down at least 1, possibly 2. However, here's something we have to remember. Closing 2 elementary schools would result in 2/6 of our community losing their neighborhood school. And this is kind of the opposite of not in my backyard. Those people, I've been approached by people who will think that their elementary was one of them that was picked to be one of the ones that's going to close. Already indicated that they will work against any kind of a plan that shows that they would be losing their neighborhood school. I have gone to other school districts to their board meetings to see what happens when boards have announced or considering closing neighborhood schools. It's not pretty. There is a extreme negative reaction to that. Comparing our options to what other school district facilities around our neighboring schools isn't really an apples-to-apples comparison. West Claremont received 30% of their funding from the state. Batavia received 60, Goshen 74, Fayetteville 70, Georgetown 71, Felicity 92. They've got all these great, nice buildings out there, but they weren't paying for all of it. We'd only receive 15%, and of course then that assumes we'd be building using the burden or the OFCC requirements, which up the cost of building. It might be a wash for us, or worse. And nobody will even guarantee that fund will be there when our time finally comes up. We've got a lot of other needs in this district. We've spent a lot of time talking about facilities. There's so many other things we need to be spending our time on. Facilities have been all-consuming. We've talked about the pre-K and to K programs. There's just a whole list of issues that we ought to be looking at. And we just haven't taken the time to do that because this has been all-consuming. It's time to realize at this point that getting everything everybody wants is not going to happen. I really believe that some kind of compromise is the only way we're ever going to move ahead. We've got to come together and support our school district. We cannot continue to be like Washington, D.C. Think about D.C. There's no compromise whatsoever there, so nothing's happening. And if we all continue to dig our heels in, hold our breath, and say, you know, it's got to be my way, I've got to get everything I want, we're dead in the water. We will enter the death spiral that other school districts have gone into around the state. I keep thinking, well, that can't happen in Forest Hills. It can't happen in Forest Hills. Yeah, it can. We keep doing what we're doing, and it's just not going to be pretty. It's easy to say, I just don't like this and I'm not going to support it. But at some point, we do literally have to come together. Some of you get a thought of the day that I send out to my kids every day. And the last board meeting we had when we were making one of these decisions, the thought of the day was, keep in mind that the highways of life are full of flat squirrels that couldn't make up their mind. I don't want Forest Hills to become the flat squirrel because we just can't make up our mind. We've got to make up our mind and do something. And like I said, doing nothing is not an option. To summarize, here are my concerns. Do we have enough money allocated to each of the buildings to have a building that looks and functions like new when we're done? Do we have confidence in our estimates? Can we get some kind of a second opinion? Second thing is, do we have enough time to develop the narrative package and communicate it to our community? As a marketer, I have a real concern about our ability to assess what this plan will really deliver, get input from our education experts, and package that into something that we can deliver to the community and get them to digest it by November. I'm not sure that that can be done. People have got to be excited about the sizzle in our plan. And the other thing is, as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Now, I recognize that where we are in the planning process, we don't have definitives. But at some point, we've got to give people a picture of what this actually will look like. The third thing, my third concern, is how and when do we develop the detailed plan for each building? Various people have forwarded timelines that have been used by other school districts. And most of their school districts at this point in the process were at, call it the 100,000-foot level, the line item level detail. They weren't down into the specifics of what a plan would look like. And that is something that we would I would want to see us jump on right away. Will the teachers, building administrators, curriculum experts have the ability to essentially shape the design? Yes, I know, we all want input, parents, community leaders, business leaders, but, you know, the people who really have got skin in the game are our education experts. Will they be satisfied with the changes and improvements that the new Forest Hills School District will have? Those are my concerns. I can support moving ahead with something because, like I said, doing nothing, waiting till May, supporting a $175 million plan that won't pass, none of those are reasonable paths to move forward to me. So I appreciate your patience in listening to all that, but as many of you may be aware, I've been a part of this for many, many years. I actually brought all the fact books from each of the 5 or 6 committees that have been put together over the years and the many hours that have gone into this. And I feel like this is the time and this is a place we've got to move ahead. Thank you.
Julie?
Thank you. When we started this process back in late 2013, beginning 2014, I have to tell you, I wanted more than anything for us to be united in a 5-0 vote. I think we all worked really hard, and I am proud of us for all the work we put in. Randy concluded, interestingly, I think, with his concerns, which I heard a little bit throughout his presentation, but he really focused on them at the end. And in my presentation, which I think will be a little shorter, actually are interwoven those concerns. And I just, up until today, literally at 4:30, I was still thinking about all this very, very hard. And I put into writing some thoughts that I have. And I'm sorry if they're not, if they're a little disjointed because, again, I waited until the last minute to put my thoughts down on paper. We've had a lot going on the last 6 to 8 months. One of the concerns that I had with the last bond issue was that we didn't involve the OFCC, or we hadn't had the OFCC look at us for a number of years. And lo and behold, my wish was granted in that we asked the OFCC to come back in, and they came back in late last year. The OFCC is our independent experts, engineers, and architects that work at the state level, and they come in and review buildings from an objective level and provide a current report on facilities. Prior to the issuance of the OFCC report, we commissioned as a board, actually, pardon me, Paul Fallon to do a study of community perceptions and desires concerning our facilities. At that point, before we commissioned Mr. Fallon, I suggested let's wait for the OFCC data to come back, because then we'll have a current picture of our district, and that current picture can be used in the questions that we give to our community when we go out for the Fallon study. Well, I wasn't successful in my desire on that, so the Fallon study actually occurred before the OFCC results came out. In May, we did another study. We commissioned John Fox to put 2 plans before the community and gauge the potential likelihood of success of both plans. It's no real surprise that when we put a $98 million plan up against a $160 million plan, that the $160 million plan got less support. But I think what was really telling about the John Fox study was that the needle had moved from where we were in November and December of 2013. In that, community perception was greater about our needs, and community willingness to support facilities was greater. I'll just read a few notes that I jotted down when John Fox was talking to us. It's on page 33 of his report. The general opinion of facilities went from 14% to 24% believed that our facilities were poor, so that the people understood better. 47 to 53% that they were inadequate, and 33 to 17% saying they didn't have enough information. So the needle had moved. People were understanding the need. People were buying into what we were telling them. The perception was due to the OFCC results and our talking, having all the 15 meetings we've had, to talk about the results and the needs. I know some board members have expressed in different ways that this plan, the $98 million plan or the $103 million plan with kindergarten and a permanent improvement portion is a meaningful plan, or I could go either way. But the $98 million plan, excuse me, but board members will tell you if you ask them, I can go with this plan, but really what I think is in the best interest of the districts is a more expansive plan and a longer ranging plan. What I don't see is any real, even among us, excitement, passion, bold statements. We are positioning this district for the next generations of teaching and learning. There's no master plan. Even John Fox, when he stood up before us on June 18, 2014, used the term Band-Aid. That scared the heck out of me.
I'll give you credit.
Thank you. Our jobs as elected school board members are to be leaders. We study. There are some people out there that have studied this really hard and probably even know more than we do. But we are elected to study harder, to test more, to discuss more, and come up with a recommendation that we all truly believe in. If we merely go by what one or two surveys done within a short period of time say, why are we even needed? My question is, why are we even needed? Why don't we just have the school district do survey after survey and go with what the survey says? It's up to us to educate the public. And I have to say, one of the best things we've done in recent years, in my opinion, is hire the new, we voted tonight to hire the new public relations communications coordinator. I think that's a great thing. We've had a number of discussions. That's another concern I had about the last bond issue. Randy's right. Both Randy and I have been involved in a number of facility discussions over the years. And we get to a point where the facilities committee would come to the board, we'd have one or two discussions, and then I used the word last time, and I'm going to use it again, we'd chicken out. And usually it was because we focused on the 1 versus 2 high schools. Well, we got rid of that sort of early on in the process, which was good, and it allowed us to move forward with actual meaningful discussions. The process was to be board-led. Jim said that from the beginning. We all agreed it was going to be a board-led process. Well, what we ended up doing as a board was we initiated and asked specific questions to Dallas and Ben Dallas and his committee about high schools, renovations, et cetera, and got answers from Dallas basically and Joe Kunkel. But here's the part where I think we fell short, and I take as much responsibility for this as anybody. I think we fell short in that we didn't speak to teachers and the administration. Now, we heard from Dallas clearly, but did we ever have any meaningful dialogue with the people that teach in the buildings every day, or the people that operate the buildings every day? We didn't, in any concerted, unified effort. I think some of us had individual conversations. But I have to say that I believe if we don't have the support of the teachers and the administrators in a strong, energetic way, a bond issue doesn't have a chance. And from what I'm hearing, we don't have it. That's what I've heard. And people, like it or not, good or bad, it's no, and I said this 2 or 3 meetings ago, it's no reflection on Dallas. People are afraid to speak against what they believe their boss believes in. It's just common in the workplace. But people will tell you privately. People will tell you privately if they're comfortable talking to you, which I think people, for some reason, certain people have been comfortable telling you that. And they'll tell you if you reach out to them, and I know Randy's done some of that reach out. So I think he's heard some of the things I've heard. Joe Kunkel seems like a great guy. He seems like a really knowledgeable guy. He's done a lot of projects over the years. He's been around a while. He did the work on the renovated plans. And I have to tell you, I asked Dallas this early in the meeting. When we talk about the renovations close to OFCC, Joe estimated it's about 80% of what the OFCC recommends. And what concerns me, and this has concerned me throughout, is that all the districts around us, and I get that some districts have funding from the state that we're not going to get, but all the districts around us that have done renovations, even districts that are more financially, or as financially able as we are, have had OFCC standard work done. Marymount, Milford, other districts, not just the outlying sort of poorer districts. That's probably not a good way to say it, but districts that don't have the same needs. We, as a board, several times talked in meetings about good stewardship and ample vetting. And this is one of Randy's concerns, and it's one of mine, and it hasn't stopped. Again, I don't mistrust Joe. I think Joe's a great guy, but we've never had anybody look at Joe's numbers. We've never, ever had one person do it. And we talked about it. We talked about it again. And again, I assume responsibility for that. I pushed it in meetings, but we as a board never followed up with that. Never happened. What are we getting? We're getting a new Wilson, and every one of us, I think, has consistently said we need a new Wilson, no question. The other 8 buildings are getting what is called popularly renovate to new, which is a term that I've never embraced. I've never liked it because, well, what does it really mean? Does renovate to new mean renovate under current standards? That's not possible. We don't have enough money to do that. If you put $20 million or close to $20 million into a new Wilson, the rest is left for renovation. We're not going to have renovate to new under current standards. Does renovate to new mean like it was when the building was built? Well, that might be it. Do we really want that? I don't think we do. Or does it mean we renovate so that we have an additional 30 to 40-year life for each building? I really don't believe we can accomplish that in 8 buildings after you take out the cost of the new Wilson. Randy and I met with Joe 2 Fridays ago, and Dallas was there as well. And Jim, I think, met with him a couple weeks before we did, to review his work, because it all seemed still pretty nebulous to me. Everything we saw, what I remember seeing, rendering-wise, and again, a picture's worth 1,000 words, was, I think the first time Joe came to us, he showed us on the board what air would look like if it's renovated. And what we saw were walls put up where walls didn't exist at grade levels. We saw some collaborative space, but that was pretty much it. Oh, and we saw a slanted roof on the building to make it look from the road like a newer building. When we met with Joe, I was still searching for answers and still hoping that the renovated plan might be the right thing to do. What we learned from Joe is there are general areas or concepts, Joe called them concepts, like electrical, HVAC, finishes, etc., designated for each building. And I asked Joe, he said it, and I asked him again so I was clear. After the bond passes, the plan is to engage the stakeholders, teachers, parents, and community to decide how exactly we're going to spend the money on each building. Well, I think exactly the opposite should happen. I think we should engage those stakeholders in the planning process, so from the very beginning, they're engaged, they're enthusiastic, and they buy into it. Not after we've passed a bond issue. Because I think that energy and enthusiasm would flow from the parents and the teachers and even the kids and the administrators out to the community. And I think Princeton, if I'm right, I remember speaking with the person who facilitated the Princeton design, said that's exactly how they did it, and it was very successful for them. Forest Hills is all about, we've always been about operating the best school district we can at the best cost possible. There are no demonstrated savings in this plan. There are no efficiencies that I've seen. Tony asked several times if we can afford 9 buildings. It's been tight for many years now, even before the recession, causing us to go out to the voters for an operating levy every 3 to 4 years. And again, I'm going to ask Tony's question that I don't think was ever really answered, nobody's fault. Can we afford to continue to operate 9 buildings? I don't think we can. One of the things that occurred to me that I didn't jot down this afternoon that is very important is, like it or not, we still have a division in this district. I don't know how it became this way. I don't know if it's because of 2 high schools. I'm not sure. But there still is a sense of division in the district. We had a group of people come in, I don't know when it was. It was one of our Saturday meetings. And it just happened that day that it was a number of folks who were in favor of a Boulder plan. And that was at the point when we were still talking about possibly renovating. The 1 high school versus 2 high school debate hadn't ended. And shortly after that, there was a suggestion. It wasn't, I think it came from somebody other than us. I think the initial suggestion came from somebody other than us about 4 elementary schools. And for the first time, I saw this, what I call significant, again, I can't say it's a majority, but a significant group of people who are opposed to the plan as it currently seems to be, excited. It was the first time I saw any excitement, but it was district-wide excitement for looking at the possibility for elementaries. And as soon as we retreated to the renovate plan, that excitement went away. And the people that we're hearing from, I think all of us do, and we all tend to hear from people that are like-minded to us, potentially. But we've heard from a lot of people. The people that we need to support this plan and lead the charge, there's a significant group of them that are against it. And my fear is not only are they against it, but that they will work against the issue. And I just feel like we can do better. Now, do I want to kick the can down the road? I've heard that term so many times. Absolutely not. Do I think we could use a little more time? Do I think we're almost there? Do I think we're getting there? I absolutely do. I'm not suggesting we go with the larger plan. I suggest that we keep working, we continue to educate the community, we continue to engage the community, reach out to groups we haven't reached out to yet. Teachers, we've never asked the teachers what they think. We've never asked the union president or the union leadership what they think. They talk to us individually, we haven't talked to them as a group. Students even, custodians and maintenance who are in the buildings every day, central office, parents, community members, and even local government. We reach out to those people, engage them some more, get everybody excited about this, and we come up with a plan that a substantially larger number of people can embrace than what I think we're going to go on the ballot.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether we have a debate going, at least a discussion. Is there other comment?
We'll hear from Dallas or Rick.
Rick, Dallas, care to weigh in?
No.
We've each had an opportunity to talk to each other and to the community here, and my job, at least, is not to change anybody's mind, and in fact, quite to the contrary. I hope and truly pray that our community will come together. But if it doesn't, and people want to continue to assert one position or another, as they absolutely have a right to do, I hope we do so respectfully. Julie is not going to vote in support of a plan that I hope we move forward with tonight, and that's okay. It was my hope that we would have a unanimous board as we move forward on this. I do think that would have been helpful as we went out to our community. I know there are a group of concerned and caring parents in the district that want something else. I think that something else is a $173 million plan that John Fox has told us has no likelihood of support. And that's where I think they're wrong. But I respect their opinion, and what I care about is that they care. They care enough to have spent the time coming to these meetings, to have reached out to us, and I think they're going to care enough to actively campaign against it. And so for those of you that will be in favor of this plan, I hope you'll get behind it. But even if you don't, and you're entitled to have a different opinion. I hope that everybody will be respectful of everyone else's thoughts and opinions on the matter. Anyone else? Well, if nothing else, what I would suggest we do is move on to public commentary, and then we will take up the issue of whether we're going to move forward with a resolution for consideration on Monday. Anything else before we do public commentary? All right, as you know, we have the opportunity for public commentary. I have 3 cards here. We'll give you each 5 minutes each, and the first to speak is Mr. Rick Anderschott. Anderschott. Thank you, sir.
Just wanted to make sure that was on. For some reason, my voice has decided to leave me at an inopportune time. Dr. Jackson, Mr. Fruman, members of the board, concerned citizens, thanks for this opportunity to present my views on the Forest Hills School District's facility plan, which is now being widely and somewhat heatedly discussed. My wife and I moved into the Forest Hills School District 28 years ago this month. We chose Anderson Township because it offered affordable housing and good schools. I'm now a retired engineer with considerable experience in planning, designing, and constructing facilities. Both of our children went to Forest Hills schools. Our daughter attended Forest Hills Middle School, not Nagel Middle School, but Forest Hills Middle School, and then Anderson High School. Our son attended Ayer Elementary and Anderson Junior High, and then Anderson High School. How many of you are aware that we had a middle school prior to Nagel? And that we had junior high at both Anderson and Turpin for several years. Grades 7 to 12 at both schools, I think from 1990 to 1999. You talk about overcrowding. The junior highs at Anderson and Turpin were due, I believe, to short-sightedness of some of the school boards of the 80s and the early 90s. Were those ideal situations? Not really. Both of our children did well in school, went on to college, graduated, and have led successful lives. Both of them have said, it wasn't the facilities, Dad, it was the teachers that made the difference. People like Mr. Jackson, Mrs. Stewart, Mr. Heimbaugh, Frau Cronenberger, Roger Grooms, Mr. Porter, Rosie Schrader, Coach Suriano, and Mr. Vest, to name a few. Many of them have retired, some have even passed on. That being said, we do need to provide a good learning environment for our students. It's hard for kids to learn in crowded classrooms without proper ventilation and lighting, and certainly we don't want them in schools where we have raw sewage floating in the halls. So that brings us to the facilities plan in front of us. When I worked in facilities planning and design, the hardest part for me as a design agent, working for an engineering and architectural company, was to get the owner to figure out what they wanted. And you guys have struggled with that, I'm sure. So the board struggled with that. They asked the Facilities Commission to look at our facilities. The commission issued a report, and they gave us 2 options. The school board chose the less costly option. Some say the plan doesn't do enough. So I asked the question, what is enough? Some say it doesn't reconfigure or consolidate our schools to get savings through economies of scale. What schools are you going to close? Are you going to close Maddox and then send all of those kids to a bigger school at Sherwood? Are you going to close Ayer and send all those kids to the bigger school at Summit? I live in an area served by Ayer Elementary, and I'll tell you, everyone in my neighborhood is against sending their kids to another school away from their neighborhood. In spite of the fact that Ms. Bissinger says we got to consolidate, I don't think it'll fly. Are we going to close Turpin and then consolidate at Anderson? Are we going to close Anderson and consolidate at Turpin? I don't think that'll fly. So I think the plan that's been brought up is fairly reasonable. I do have a few concerns. One thing is that both Wilson and from what I heard tonight, Maddox have to be replaced now. And then the other question that was somewhat addressed is, have we taken a good look at the demographics of the area? Are we prepared for growth? Just several months ago, Anderson Township was faced with the possibility of a big new subdivision being built down between Hopper Road and the river and between 8 Mile and Asbury, and that'd probably be 100, 150 more students if that was built out. The other question that was brought up is, how confident is your design agent in their cost estimates? And what is the scope of work for each building? These things have been brought up, and my time is running out. My wife and I have supported virtually every levy that's come up because we know how important education is to our community and because of the value that it adds to our home. Not all seniors, and I'm one of them, are not in that group, feel that way. Seniors on fixed income can't afford an increase in taxes, and that's an inequity of our system for supporting schools in Ohio. We've seen people move out of Anderson to Clermont County because the taxes were going to be lower, and then move back in because they couldn't get a levy passed in one of the Clermont County school districts. A friend of ours who lives in one of the more affluent areas of Clermont said to me recently, "I hope you guys don't muck up your schools like we have." Actually, he used a little stronger term, but in mixed company, I won't use it. So I say, and I agree with Julie, let's get this right. But we have to make a trade-off between what you want, what you need, and what the community can afford. My wife and I are willing to help pay for what is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andershot. Thank you very much. All right, so I gave him an extra minute, and I realize that. There's only 3, and I didn't want to cut off somebody with only 3 people speaking, so we'll give everybody 6 minutes. Mr. Schiano?
Good evening. My name is Peter Schiano. I'm a resident of Anderson Township for many years. Been very active in school planning and on the finance committee for many years, consultant to the board. I've done a lot of work with the board, put many, many hours into the facilities concept and other programs for our district. 3 kids all through here, all through college, all doing wonderful. No complaints. I think we have a great school district. I think we need new facilities. I don't disagree. We need to do something, and the time is near to do it. And Dr. Heiss and I had a little laugh in January. I spoke at the first meeting. I'm going to speak at the last meeting, and I didn't speak in between. But the laugh was, I said, "What's the rush?" And what I meant by that is, let's not rush into a decision, and I think that's what we're doing. The $98 or $100 million plan doesn't address a lot of issues, in my feeling. I agree with Julie on a lot of issues. We've not talked to the teachers. The teachers are not supporting this. I mean, I had a meeting with a few teachers last week, and they don't support this plan. And I don't know if I support it. I should say up front, I think we got to do something. And the Renovate to New, I was very excited by it. Wasn't initially. Sat through the meetings, and I think it can work. I really do. Take it down to studs and redo it and do it right. The problem is we didn't ask the teachers or the administrators or anybody, what do they need? What are their needs? All we're doing is renovating a bunch of buildings. And we have too many buildings. We have 9 buildings for 7,500 students. And demographic study after demographic study telling us that's going to go down. And I don't believe them either, Andy, because I've been reading them for 20 years too. But education will be very, very different. The system during the life of these buildings. And what the renovation to new does, it does buy us another generation. It buys us 25, 30 years for that change to take place. And again, I think it all works. I have 2 problems, and the 2 problems have probably been addressed. And I was kind of surprised. I agreed with Randy on a lot of things, and I agree with Julie on a lot of things. We haven't addressed the educational needs. We haven't, the wants and needs. What do we need to do? Where is the plan? I ran many a company. I was a corporate risk manager for many years and retired. Now I run a consulting business, and I have many clients, 100 million and larger in some cases. Big operations, as big as the school district. First thing you do is you put a plan together and you identify your objectives and your needs and your wants, and you start identifying. We never did that. I've been at all the meetings. I've been at most of the meetings. I've been following every meeting. We've gone around this backwards. We started out with how much can we get the voters to pass, and how can we get this bond up on the levy by November? That was the old issue. That was from day one. The president, Jim, wanted to get a November bond issue, and he was stuck on that, and that's what I meant with my comments with Rush. If it's February or May or whenever, we need to build some schools. We need to renovate our schools. Renovate to new is a good idea. But do we need 9 buildings? Can we afford 9 buildings? I'm retired. Many of us are retiring. A lot of gray hair, and I feel good tonight. I'm not outnumbered by the youngsters this time. My income is going down. How much more can I afford? So am I going to wind up selling my house like a lot of our friends did and move out to Claremont or move out of state? That's what you're almost forced to do, because I'm not a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief, and I'm not young, and I'm not working. I'm retired. My wife's going to retire this year or next year, and on a fixed income and our savings, we have to maintain our house. And my taxes exceed my mortgage payment. And, can we keep going that way? So there's lots of considerations. I totally support the concept of a facilities plan. We never put a plan together. I never saw a plan. All I see is costs, and cost is what you call a plan. And maybe to lawyers, that's what a plan is. But a plan to me is sitting down at a meeting and putting together your needs, your wants, and what we have to have, get the educators involved, get the administrators involved, and start looking at costs. We haven't even looked at costs. Randy, last meeting, tried to address cost a little bit by saying, but the new boilers and air conditioners would be more efficient. We have some small savings, and I agree. But you know what? If we went down to 8 buildings, get rid of 1, I know redistricting and consolidation are nasty words, but we need to cut down the buildings. We can't afford 9 buildings and our payroll in the future. We can't do it. We're going to bankrupt this school district. I've said it for years, and you've heard me say that before. We can't continue the payroll we have, continue to keep the great quality of teaching we have, the great school system we have, and let these buildings continue to deteriorate. We were very fortunate what we did for many years is we used the interest income from the savings to pay for maintenance. We didn't ignore it. In 2008, the interest rates dropped, like we said. I'm running out of time. In closing, take our time, do it right. Let's do it right for the first time. Let's not just do something to do something. I've talked to 3 or 4 members of the board in the last few weeks, and we have to do something as a clause I hear from 2 or 3 of these people. And, we have to do something. Let's do it right. The old Crosby theory, do it right the first time. Let's not do it over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sciano. Jim Yunker.
Jim Yunker, 7222 Deacons Bench, father of 2 graduates of Forest Hills and former member of the Facilities Committee. And I wasn't even planning to speak, but I didn't hear everybody's comments, and I apologize. I had a meeting downtown. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a risk manager, but I have been involved in marketing. You've had 2 very qualified marketing people do surveys. I take, after 40-some years in using data from market research, I trust it. You had qualified people doing it. Being on and when I was listening to Mrs. Bissinger saying the teachers were not involved, I know they were involved in the past. They've been members of the Facilities Committee, maybe not this last one. I also know in my marketing, I look to the management for direction and plans. You've got a qualified superintendent and treasurer. You are management for this huge organization. I don't disagree with the previous two speakers that maybe some people don't think you've spent enough time. I do. I'm not in suggesting that you rush. I don't think you're rushing. But it's time to put it to the voters to see what they are going to support. And you've had the market research to tell us what is going to, what's not going to. And I would hope, and apparently you're not going to have 100%, but the Supreme Court doesn't always have 100%. We are in a democracy. You go with the majority. So I would hope that at least the four of you respect Mrs. Bissinger's position, but that you vote to move forward and let the voters tell you and the management whether this is something they are going to support. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yonker. Any other cards? Going once? No? All right. Further discussion?
Well, I'll bring up a couple things. One, Mr. Shiana's thing of our discussion back in September. The other part of the conversation was when we brought up why rush. And I brought up, and he brought up too, it hasn't been 15 meetings. It hasn't been 6 months. It's been 18 years. And you've been there for all 18 years. That's when I talked about building from 18 years. This is not even we've had one meetings, we've had two meetings, we've had a couple things, in the past we've brought it up for 3 or 4 meetings. Well, no, this time, this is 18 years to get to this point. 18 years to move needles. The thing I liked a lot about the way we did this is that we started from the ground level. Having that other information, we had it there, but we built on that. We came up with multiple plans. My concern is what stone have we left unturned? Okay, we've come up, we had a 4 elementary school plan with that there was some interest in, but then we ran into a legal roadblock that it wasn't a $130 million plan, it was a $170 million plan. It was $80 million more from, and is it a great, an $80 million educational experience? Didn't hear that from anyone. We have talked to the teachers and administrators, and I've heard other concerns. From the administrators I talked to with bigger elementaries, there's some consternation with that. So, I don't want to get into all of that, but that's, for the rush, 18 years is not a rush. Okay, 15 public meetings is not a rush. I've been very impressed with all of our openness and our community coming and telling us what they like, what they don't like. I think some of the consternation is as it comes through, and I'll bring up just one last time, the one high school concept was when we got to actually the numbers, I had a number of staunch one high school people say, I think one high school I still think it's the best idea. That was also an $80 million increase. The thought, and these are obviously our people who care very much about our district. They said our district has enough other problems, other issues that $80 million could go for, that, one high school is not where we need to go. We need to put that somewhere else. So we've gone through all of these things to get to this point. My concern about not going forward and is, okay, we've built this, we've done all this work. What else? We have a couple of other things, and there will be things that over these next couple months that obviously are going to be things that we will be doing as well. But we're at a critical junction. The only other thing I'd like to bring up, because I've seen it in a lot of emails, and Julie brought it up too. I went back and I watched our last one with John Fox, which was riveting television, by the way. Is the Band-Aid comment. His comment actually was that this is not a Band-Aid plan. Just like your comment that got in the paper of putting lipstick on a pig, it was, this is not putting lipstick on a pig. And then it gets put in the paper. Tony Hemmelgarn said it was putting lipstick on a pig. You're like, no, you missed the not part. Okay, and that happens. So just for the record, that this plan was not a Band-Aid plan. This was a complete, and we can look at, I'm happy to look,
He was here twice, I heard it once.
Okay. Well, I didn't hear it. And that's the other thing I get through this is as we go through, we're all here, every one of us is here with our own inherent biases about what we think needs to be done. And some of those are conflicting even within ourselves. So we do tend to hear what we hear. And we can hear the same thing and we can see it differently too. And I get that, and I've seen that in other places too. So, but that was, when I've seen it, and maybe I may be wrong on it too, and I will be the first to admit it if that be the case, but what I heard was that it wasn't a Band-Aid, and that Tony did not say it was putting lipstick on a pig. So, those are my comments.
Others?
Julie, let me ask you to consider one thought. We're not locking in on a program today. What we would be locking in on is the amount of money we're going to borrow. I haven't talked to anybody, I've even talked to some anti-tax groups, who thinks that we ought to be borrowing less than the max mortgage we can take out. So the question may become, how do we move money around? Is 4.8 right for air? We questioned, is that enough money to actually do what's needed there? But as we move forward, one of the concerns that I put out on the table was, do we have the input from the education experts to say this is what we need, not what we want, but what we need? And what we're doing is saying, yep, we want it all. Well, by all meaning, we want to borrow the max we can borrow to do everything we can possibly do. Yep, we said we're going to renovate because, let's face it, that is a cheaper option than tearing down buildings and building from scratch. But anyway, the point I wanted to make was, can we support borrowing the maximum amount of money the state is going to let us borrow and move forward with a process to get the right people involved? And we might have to make adjustments on the line item budget that we've seen so far, because I don't think that, we know that's not locked and loaded. It's at the line item level. So can we agree to borrow the maximum amount of money and work on the plan as we go forward?
Well, it's the maximum amount of money if you're looking at it from that one perspective. Here's, how do you, if we don't even know what this plan involves and what the renovations are, and Pete talked about it. Renovate to new sounds like a great concept. I don't think we have enough money to do it. I don't think we have enough money to do it. And remember when we were in the meeting with Joe, I specifically asked, because we all, we all come from our own experience. Joe was talking about STEM, science, technology, English, and math, I guess, right? Engineering and math, sorry. Engineering and math, and talked about redoing the science fair, which everybody thinks that Anderson's is pretty pathetic, right, at this point.
Right.
And one great science teacher told me, one of my kids being in this district, I would have moved out a long time ago. I wouldn't be teaching here. So that's great. And I said, well, what about the rooms in the back? What about the history rooms and the foreign language rooms? What's going to happen to them? Well, we're not sure what we're going to do with them. We can put new finishes on and make them look better, but what about the auditorium? Anderson, again, my experience, because this is the life I live, because my child goes to Anderson. Anderson Auditorium stinks. We have one of the three best, meaning Anderson High School, and Turpin has a great one too. Although I'm not as familiar with it as I don't live over there as much as I do in Anderson. One of the best drama departments in the tri-state area. It's ridiculous what that facility's like. There's no money for that. I mean, we're going to renovate some things to new, but the whole facility's not going to be renovated to new. We're going to do bits and pieces, and we're not even sure what those bits and pieces are, which frustrates the heck out of me, because if we don't understand, how are we going to go to Anderson Days 2 weeks from now and say, we're championing this, and here's what you're going to get. Joe said, I'm reluctant to put renderings, because when you put a rendering out there, that's what people think they're going to get, and they'll hold you to it. Well, how do we communicate that? How do we communicate, we're going for the maximum amount, we're going to have a new Wilson, which would be new. We're going to do the rest of the buildings renovate to new, which, when you walk in Wilson, I guarantee you, when you walk in the renovated Summit, it's not going to look like Wilson. How do we communicate all that? How do we communicate it? So no, I can't. It's too nebulous.
But there's no scenario that you would support that is less than $105 million, right? Because we just said we need every dime that we can come up with to max out on our renovations. And
sure, one person, I think it's the same person that you suggested, we respect a lot, and who used the strategic objectives to write us a very good email, a very balanced, informed email, said, why don't you go, I have it right here, as an example. This is the conclusion of the email. As the market researcher indicated, in the past year, the public is much more aware that our facilities are in desperate need. I believe that with your leadership, we can educate them further on why the 4 elementary option is the best solution, especially if we can show them there is a way to do it cheaper. Please consider your decision in light of our strategic objectives and give our community an option for the long term. We need a plan that will encourage your kids in mind to want to move back to Anderson, not just surrounding communities. That's one option that we could continue to look at.
Look, I don't think it's productive for us to sit here and try to convince each other of each other's positions. As I said before, we should be respectful of each other's positions, and I am respectful of Julie's position on this. I disagree with it, but that's okay. I sat down with Joe Kunkel. You all will see plans in the coming months. There is science to the process he used to estimate it. I spent a lot of time with him. I asked him a lot of hard questions. I asked him, when he was looking at the various breakdowns at the various buildings, why it was this number and not some other number. He knows what he's doing, and he's been doing it, as Tony asked him at the last meeting where Mr. Kunkel was here, how many years he's done it and how many buildings he's done, and I can't remember the answer, but I thought it was 40 years and upwards of 100 buildings. Check the tape, I'm not sure, but he has a considerable amount of experience. He didn't pull these numbers out of thin air, and I sat down with him, so I trust him. But I'm not here to convince anybody else of that. I think this is a meaningful plan. I do think it'll do what we've promised the community it will do. Actually selling it, marketing it, is a whole nother discussion, and we'll have those discussions. So I don't want to bar any further discussion if we want to continue to have it, but I'm prepared to entertain a motion. On a resolution asking, do we need a motion, Rick, or do we just ask you to bring one?
You can just ask me to bring one.
Well, if we don't need a motion, then I would ask Mr. Tepfer to bring a resolution to proceed to our Monday school board meeting for $103 million with a .5 permanent improvement.
And then we vote on the resolution on Monday, correct?
Correct. Does anybody care to ask Mr. Tepfer to bring some other resolution to Monday's meeting?
No, I think that's the way to go.
All right, so on Monday, Mr. Tepfer will bring to us for consideration at our regular school board meeting a resolution to proceed for a $103 million bond with a .5 permanent improvement levy. Any other discussion? Personally, I truly want to thank each and every one of my fellow school board members for the amount of time, energy, commitment, care, concern that everybody's brought to this process. I also very, very much want to thank Dr. Jackson, Mr. Tepfer, Mr. Johnson, other members of administration, and of course, Dallas, your facilities committee, and Joe Kunkel, and Mr. Fox, and Mr. Fallon, and I know there's others that I've forgotten for the considerable amount of time and effort that has gone into this over the last 6.5 months. You all see the public meetings. There's a lot of other time that's gone into this. Everybody's worked really hard, and I truly appreciate the efforts. Thank you. So if there's nothing else, our next regularly scheduled board meeting is Monday, July 21st at 7 p.m. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Tepfer?
Mrs. Bissinger?
Yes.
Dr. Heiss?
Yes.
Mr. Hemmelgarn?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Fruman?
Yes. Thank you all.